Okay, hello all you crazy people out there. My name is Michael, I like wizards and dragons and making games, and welcome back to 3D Games in GameMaker Studio 2. We have lighting at long last. This is a red-ish directional light coming from about there and traveling to about there. And today I'm going to be talking about some more lights. These are going to be point lights. So point lights are fairly similar to directional lights in the grand scheme of things, except instead of being an infinite source of light in a specific direction, they originate from a point in space, and they have a range. And the closer you are to the point in space, the more lighting you will receive, and the farther you are from that point in space, the less lighting you will receive, until you're outside the range, and at which point you'll receive no lighting. So I've talked about how light works and the basics of the lighting calculations. A lot of this lighting code I will keep around, but I'm going to comment out. I will probably be revisiting this later for some other purposes, but for the time being, I care about point lights instead of directional lights. So I will be commenting out the directional light stuff. You know what I could also do is I could also put it in in another function. Right now, I haven't really talked about other functions in shaders before. You can define other functions besides main. So if you wanted to have a function that was like calculate light or something, you could. I will not do that now. There aren't, this doesn't work, right? No? Alright. Can't do code folding in shaders. That's unfortunate. Let's talk about point lights. So instead of a direction, I'm going to call the uniforms. I'm going to keep the uniforms from the last video, the shader uniforms, but instead of a direction, it's going to be position. And I'll do some other fun things with that later. Let's put this in the middle of the room somewhere. What would be about the middle of the room? That's about the middle of the room. So as opposed to a vector, which is what the directional light direction was, this is the position in the room, which is what I started doing when I was talking about directional lights, and then had to awkwardly go back and fix that, because that made things not behave the way I wanted them to. That's neither here nor there. In addition, we'll have a range. Do I want to set that as a uniform now? I guess I will. I'll give it a light range. And that will be the maximum distance where the lighting will be applied. After which point, the lighting will not have any more effect, will no longer have an effect, and things will just be lit by the ambient color, whatever that happens to be. What would a good range be? I'll give it like 200 or so, I think. That'll be the light range. Okay. So the first thing that we're going to do is, just as we did with directional light stuff, and I'm going to leave a comment up here explaining it, point light stuff. We will establish the direction between the light and the surface, and this is going to be a vec3. That is not a vec3, that is just a vec, which doesn't really mean anything. And we're going to call that light direction again, as we did up here in the directional light code in the last video. But now, instead of that being anything specified by the user, that is simply going to be the difference between the world position, which is something else I'm going to have to do. So it's not just the normals that I forget about this too, it's the position as well sometimes. We will, for one, also need the normal, so I guess I'll just have that there as well. For two, position, which is going to be the in position. Where is in position? In position times the world matrix, and that is going to do the same for the position as it does for the normal. It's going to transform it to a point in space. This varying from the fog part of the fragment shader is a little bit misleading because it's a little bit more than the world position, but ignore all the stuff up here. This is for fog. Don't mind the fog. It might actually be helpful if I were to comment out all of the fog calculations. so that the fog isn't sitting there and distracting a little bit from the actual lights. Anyway, we now have the world position of the vertex, the world normal of the vertex, and as I was saying, the direction that the light is going to be traveling to each vertex is simply going to be the difference between world position, and light position, which is the uniform representing the position of the light, because light travels out radially from the light source, and you can subtract vectors of the same size, and you will get the difference between them, which you can think of as the direction between the two vectors. Next, something else that we're interested, and that is not going to be a vector like I started typing, is going to be a floating point variable for the distance to the light source. And the distance is simply going to be the length of the direction vector. Length is a function, which is essentially the distance formula that you learned in geometry class. If you were to use the length function on a vec2, it would simply be the vector.x times vector.x plus vector.y times vector.y, and then you just take the square root of that result, also known as the Pythagorean theorem. It works in 3D as well. The only difference being, instead of simply adding together the x component squared and the y component squared, you would also add together the z component squared, and you would have the length of a 3D vector. Now, since things that are farther away from the light source are to receive less light, we are going to look for something called the attenuation, which is essentially the reciprocal, the inverse of the distance to the light source. So I will say float. I'm not even going to attempt to spell that correctly. Float ATT for attenuation. There are different equations you can use for this depending on how exactly you want light to fade out at a distance, but the simplest one that I can think of would look something like range minus the distance divided by the range. And you can make this as complicated or as not complicated as you want. All this particular equation means is that if the distance between the vertex and the light source is 0, that's going to be the range minus 0 divided by the range, which is going to be 1. If the distance from the vertex to the light source is the same value as the range, let's say that the light source has a range of 100. If you're 100 units away from the light source, it's going to be 100 minus 100 is 0, divided by 100, which is going to be 0. And that is going to mean the vertex receives no light from the light source. And if the vertex is farther away from the light source than the range, it's going to be a negative number. Let's say range of 100 minus a distance of, say, 200, for example, is going to be negative, divided by the range is going to be a negative number, which, similar to the angle difference up here in the directional light, which I will be revisiting, that doesn't really help to have a negative distance. You can't have negative light. So instead, let's use the good old max function to ensure that the attenuation value will never go below 0. Okay, so this is going to be a value between 0 and 1 at the end of the day. Also, as I must say in every video, you can say 0.0 for a floating point number in a shader, or you can just say 0 point, which I prefer because it's less typing. Okay, there is a helicopter flying overhead. Can you hear that? There are some offices nearby where I live, and one of them does actually have, like, a fancy full-on helicopter landing pad for reasons that I do not understand. I kind of assume that's where that would be going because I don't know of anywhere else where... Actually, there's a hospital some distance away too. It could be that. Anyway, the dot product and the angle between the normal of the surface of the vertex and the light ray is still relevant, the same way that it was in the directional light code. So remember this. We're going to come back to this now. Light direction has already been defined, but it is not yet normalized. So instead of normalizing the uniform or whatever I was doing, I'm just going to reassign it. So I'm going to say light direction equals dog. My God. The universe is just hell-bent on being as loud as possible for me today, isn't it? With that out of the way, instead of using a uniform for the light direction, because there now is no uniform representing light direction, we will simply normalize ourselves. So, converting the difference between the world position of the vertex and the light position to a value between 0 and 1. Next, as I said, the light angle difference found with the dot product is still going to be relevant. It's going to be exactly the same as it was in the directional light calculation. Now all the pieces are in place, and as the grand finale, all we have to do is multiply, not the light ambient color, that would be weird, is multiply the existing color value that we got, which is so far the same as the color value that we got from the directional lights in the last video that I made. So that's going to be the light color times the light angle difference plus the ambient color. We're just going to throw the extra term of the attenuation in there. So the farther away you are from the light source, the less light you receive. This should work. And I've got a variable missing. What is missing? Range. I would like that to be light range, which is a shader uniform. Okay. Light range minus light dist divided by light range. And light ambient. Oh, did I accidentally remove that? Did I accidentally remove that? When did I remove that? Oh, that was hard-coded. All right. Do I want to uniform that? That's your homework assignment, is turn the ambient color into uniform. We're just going to hard-code that. I'll put that above the directional light stuff in case you ever want to uncomment that and just have it work or something. All right. It's not doing anything. Okay, am I just cursed or something? It doesn't seem to matter if I, like, write down notes for what I want to do in these videos beforehand, because I always seem to find new and exciting ways to mess them up anyway. All right, 10 seconds. What's wrong here? That felt like about 10 seconds. There's a couple things. And at this point, I don't know if I should like try to actually plan these videos out better, or if this is actually a good opportunity for people to figure out what the issues are before they happen to them, and then have me explain them 10 seconds later. That's all marketing. The position was being normalized, which is hilarious to think that you want to do that. So according to the lighting calculations, all objects were somewhere in the vicinity of between 0 and 1 in world space, which is, yeah, I don't know about that. 2, this is less obvious. When you multiply the position vector by the world matrix, you want to have the W coordinate in the vec4 that you build out of the position attribute be 1. You can see that up here in the object space position, which figures out the final position of each vertex on the screen. It creates a vector 4 composed of the position and 1. But when you do the same for normals, you want it to be 0. Otherwise, the math doesn't work and things aren't lit properly. And 3rd, I'm sure you can all see this coming, because this is what I got hung up on the last video also. I forgot a negative sign. So when we look at the light direction, when we normalize it, let's throw a little minus in front of there. Or if you want, you can throw a minus in front of the inside the normalize. It'll result in the same thing. What are you complaining about now? That is a... Okay, that is not a value that has meaning. It's essentially trying to multiply a vector 3 by a 4 by 4 matrix, so instead you want to take the quantity of the vector 4 that this is going to spit out, wrap it in parentheses, and grab the xyz of that instead. Okay, if you wanted to be safe, you could use a proper vector 3 constructor, but who does that, honestly? Writing safe code. Certainly not me. Anyway, we have a point light, and you can see it's lighting the different faces. It's originating at about, I'm pointing my finger at the screen, but you obviously can't see that. It's originating about here in the world. It's hovering somewhere 64 pixels above the ground, 64 units above the ground. And it's illuminating these two squares, but not this, not the purple octagon off in the distance. That's the only lighting on that is the ambient color. If I get close to it, I want to say I'm about 64 units tall. You can see the top of my player cylinder is illuminated more brightly than the bottom part. And it's got a radius of about-ish 200. What did I set it to? 200 or 250? I think it was 200. And we have a point light. Okay. That was more involved than a directional light, but hopefully if I did a good job explaining directional lights, that was already like half the battle when it came to point lights. The only real difference is the attenuation term, which describes how light fades at a distance. I've seen a couple different versions of attenuation. One that I am using in the other thing that I'm making looks more like this. If I make copy and paste in, this is more of a distance squared thing than the linear fall off that I have over here. If you want to model things, I've plugged Desmos, the online graphing calculator, before when it comes to modeling sine waves and things like that. If you want to model a fallout model as well, a fall off model as well for things like lighting, or I think you're allowed to use them for 3D positional sound as well. So if I were to zoom in on the graph between 0 and 1, these are the intercepts. You can think of 1 as fully illuminated, 0 as not illuminated at all. On the x-axis, 1 is the range, and 0 is point blank on top of the point light position. In the graphing calculator itself, you can set the range value to the actual range of your light source, but that's going to make the graph look a little weird. You'll have to do some annoying graph scaling to... Ooh, I'm losing control here. You'll have to scale the graph to make it look like anything meaningful, so I would generally leave the range as 1. If you wanted to do a distance squared thing, that would be what? This whole thing to the second power? Something like that. And then you can disregard the part of the curve that goes back up because you only care about the part between 0 and 1.
Hey.
If you wanted to have a much sharper fall off, you could increase the power. If you wanted to have a lower fall off, you could perhaps take the square root of it instead. Raising something to the power of 0.5 is the same as taking the square root. In this case, things would stay illuminated until about 3/4 across the range, and then it would get dark very quickly. You could make that more extreme by messing with the exponent. Hopefully this gives you ideas for exactly how you want your light to look. Again, as with the other shader videos that I've done, this is Desmos, the online graphing calculator. I'll put a link to that in the video description. Okay. You know what, come to think of it, you could also have different fall-off models for the different color channels. So you could have red fade at a different rate than green or blue in the color. That could be an interesting effect. I will not do that now. If you are curious about trying that, you can mess around with the different color channels in the output color. Anyway, I have gone on for long enough. My name is Michael. I like wizards and dragons and making games. Let me commit this to source control. Stuff. If you want this code, you can find a link to the repository in the video description. I have a Patreon for these videos, so if you want to chip in towards them being made, there's links to that in the places that you'd expect to find a crowdfunding, crowdsourcing, whatever. Otherwise, I try to make about 2 of these a week. One Let's Make a Tower Defense game and one tutorial. I think that's it, and I will see you all later. Special thanks to Edward Holt, Indie Punch, and Zenith for supporting these videos. If you want your name in the credits and to force me to pronounce them out loud at the end of every video, head over to the Patreon page in the video description and join the fun.